When you go to your Type menu and choose Font, you see a list of all the fonts installed on your computer. You'll also notice that each font has an icon next to it. Some have a red A, others a double T, and still others have a green and black O. The fonts with the red A are Adobe Type 1 fonts. This is an older technology that was developed by Adobe in the mid-1980s for use with their PostScript printing language. These fonts, combined with Apple's first laser printer, were what really got the whole desktop publishing thing going back then. They're obviously still in use today, and there's nothing wrong with them from a quality standpoint, but they do have a couple of drawbacks. One is that there aren't as many characters, or what we refer to as glyphs, in a Type 1 font. We'll talk more about glyphs in a minute, but if you're looking for a special character, say a Greek letter, you won't find that in a regular Type 1 font. The other drawback to Type 1 is that they're not cross-platform. So if I had a design that used Type 1 fonts, and I was sending it to a colleague who was working on Windows, that person would have to have the Windows version of that font. She wouldn't be able to use the Macintosh font file. The double T icons are for TrueType fonts. TrueType was developed by Apple in the late 1980s, initially to compete with Adobe's Type 1, which was a proprietary technology, and the fonts were really expensive. Apple licensed TrueType to Microsoft, and that's why you would see a lot of TrueType fonts on Windows computers. The black and green O is for OpenType, which is the latest and greatest in type technology. OpenType fonts are truly cross-platform. You use the same font file on both Mac and Windows, so if I were sending this to a service bureau to get output, I could send them my font file and they could install it on their machines, even if they were using Windows. OpenType also supports thousands and thousands of glyphs or characters. So if a person is using an OpenType font in Germany, for example, and sends me the file, I'll still see all of the special characters in German. I'm going to go back up to the font menu, and you can see that all of the names of the fonts are previewed in that font. And this is nice because you can tell at a glance what the font is going to look like when you start to use it. If you go to the Preferences under the Type section, you can choose to turn off the font preview, and you can also control the size of it. So I'll change mine to large, and we'll see how that looks. The font preview is on by default, and I think most people prefer it that way, but it does take the computer a little extra rendering power to draw all those previews, so if you have a lot of fonts installed, you might prefer to turn it off. Another reason you might want to have it off is if you work with a lot of symbol or picture fonts. So even though your font might be called Wingdings, it will display in the font list as scissors, bracket, telephone star. So you might prefer to see just the name of the font in that instance. When you have a type object selected on your artboard, you can also access the font list from the control bar. You can see here that it doesn't have the font preview in it, however, but if you go to the character panel, you can see the fonts previewed just as they are under the Type menu. I'm going to open up the character panel by pressing Command-T, and I can place my cursor in the font family field, and then just press the up or down arrow keys on my keyboard to scroll through the different fonts in the list. These are alphabetical, of course, but this gives you a quick preview of how your type will look in a different font. You may notice something else about some of these font names. Some of them have STD at the end, which means standard, and others say Pro. And these are Adobe fonts, and this is just a naming convention that Adobe uses. And the difference between standard and Pro is sort of like the difference between a base model Honda Civic and the LX version. The Pro fonts have a lot more characters or glyphs than the standard ones. I'll change this word to Myriad Standard, and then open my Glyphs panel. And there you can see all of the characters in the entire font. I can change that font to Myriad Pro down here at the bottom of the Glyphs panel, and now you can see that there are a lot more glyphs in the Pro version. And we're going to be talking about glyphs in the next movie.